Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the Australian-based band The Church, because I recently spoke to their main man, Steve Kilbey. To find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff, The Church brought out a new album, pretty new, last year, 2023, Eros, Zeta and the Perfume Guitars. This was on Easy Action Records, and also Steve has done a solo work with Martin Kennedy. This is called Kilbey Kennedy, and the album is titled Premonition K. This came out in the summer of 2024 on Easy Action Records. Anyway, you'll find out more about those releases and a lot more in this fascinating interview. So do pay attention. This though, right, so after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Steve, it's over to you.
I had many, but like you, of course I love Dylan, of course I love the Beatles, of course I love the Stones and all of that. But my most significant thing was, there were two of them. The first one was Bolan, the second one was Bowie.
Blimey, we were sticking with the bees, aren't we?
And talk about thinking B-sides were always going to be that good. The B-side of Hot Love. There was a time, Raw Ramp and the other song, I was, wow, B-sides are great. And look, Mark's giving these great songs away on B-sides, but alas, that was not to continue. If only Bolan could have mustered something as good as There Was a Time and Raw Ramp on his later albums, that would have been really good, but
yes, I did listen to a 15-minute sort of prog kind of experimental thing the other day. Somebody recommended it. It was side 4 on a compilation. It was produced by Tony Visconti, and it was something of Ram.
The Children of Ran.
That's the one. Yes.
Okay. So what you actually listened to was Bolan sketched it all out. He sketched out the Children of Ran, and I believe Tony came along and sort of added stuff to that. But that was never meant to be heard the way you and I heard it. I believe, it was a sort of very much a post kind of thing. But the Children of, so you're not very familiar with Bolan?
Well, I know all the obvious stuff, and I know some of his 60s stuff when John Peel was playing various bits on the Perfume Garden, but and a couple of tracks on his last album, which I thought were quite good. But yes,
I see Bolan as John the Baptist to Bowie's Jesus as far as rock and roll goes. I don't think although Bowie never stole any of Bolan's musical ideas, he was far superior to Bolan in every single way. I don't think Bowie could have done it quite the way he did without Bolan showing him first that it could be done. That's my opinion. And as Bolan's stocks fell in my eyes, as he released worse and worse and worse albums after Electric Warrior, until they were unlistenable, and I was like, I'm done with this. Bowie was better and better. So I reluctantly transferred my allegiance, and it was allegiance. This was like a life and death stuff to me. I transferred my allegiance from Bolan to Bowie. Yes. And Bolan remained a person to me that don't make those mistakes that Bolan made. If I'm going to have a career, keep remembering what happened with Bolan, how he went wrong. And so look at Bowie as a way forward.
Yes, well, I don't know if you spend much time listening to both interviews with both artists from that 70s period, but it's always interesting hearing Mark, because he's quite deluded. He's
okay. you've got to get your hands. There's a double interview, and there's one interview before he's made it in England, and the guy's talking to him. He's just arrived in America, and he's like, "Yeah, I just believe in Tolkien and love and all this." And then the second interview is after he's made it, and he keeps saying to his tour manager, is my friend here yet? And he's going, "No, Mark, he's not here." Yes, Mark, I know who you mean. I know who you're talking about. He's not here. Obviously the coke dealer. And Bolan's like, it's so gone to his head. Everybody's copying him. All those cats, man. He's like talking like Keith Richard talked about. So like, all those cats, man, they're all influenced by me. Everybody digs, and it's so painful and delusional compared to this innocent hippie only a matter of 2 years ago. Like when I think of my career, I've been going almost 45 years, and you think it seems like years and years go past, like the pharaonic dynasty in Egypt where nothing happens. But in 3 years, Bolan has gone from this naive, kind of nice guy to a guy saying, I think if God walked in the room right now, he'd kind of dig me. It's a real, and it's because I love these people so much. I love Bolan, I love Bowie so much. And I had a friend, and this is what bound us together, this friendship of Bolan and Bowie, talking about it for hours, poring over everything. And it was really, it's funny now, but it was really sad to see it all happening in front of my eyes. But luckily, Bowie came along, and I had a new guy to worship.
Yes, well, and there's another interview Mark does a bit later where he's saying, "Well, I've put out a poor record just to sort of throw them, but then I'm going to come out with a classic." And it was like, still, it's like as if making a poor record was really, intentional,
Yes.
idea that he was going to and put it out so that his fans would get confused. Then he'd hit them with the classic. But you thought, no, it's just a poor record, and it's going to be followed by another equally poor record. But it was, it's. I just find those interviews fascinating, and
they're fascinating. They're fascinating, but they're terrible. When that not so much anymore, obviously. But at the time, to see this happen to this guy and see the cocaine and alcohol and money work its thing on him, which Bowie was drinking and snorting coke and making money too, but somehow he navigated all of this so much better. Yeah, I mean, I could write a fucking thesis on this stuff.
Did you ever see an amazing interview he did with a woman called something Nicholson? He's got the red coat, or he's got red jacket. It's like 1976, 77, and she, she's asking him some really interesting questions, and him saying, "I can't be in love because that will get in the way of my kind of creative moment." But it was interesting because he looks so, sort of. You think this is 76? He was pretty messed up at times, but he was
bloated.
In that interview, he was just very concise and very very interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess there are moments of illumination for all deluded pop stars.
Yes,
a real tragedy. Yeah,
but fascinating. We were on the same planet at the same time as these people, so we were lucky.
Yeah.
That's what I can think of. So you were born in England. What were your parents? Did they give you any kind of influence musically or culturally, creatively?
My dad was. I was kind of lucky. My dad was a musician. He not a great big professional famous musician, but he was a piano player, and he fought in the Second World War, and he told me that playing the piano probably saved his neck because the officers didn't want to lose their piano player, so he was never given any really dangerous jobs. So he was like, he played the piano, he could play the drums. He very much, as soon as I could think, my dad was telling me how important music was. He was going, music is the most important thing in life. never forget that. Music is number one. Of course, when the time came for me to start going, well, Dad, I need an electric guitar and I need an amp and stuff, he couldn't turn around and go, what do you think I am? You know, I mean, you're the guy who told me music's the most important thing. And my mother didn't like music, strangely enough. She's one of those rare people, perhaps had a condition called amusia. She didn't like music. She didn't understand it. It might have even annoyed her. But she did. I mean, my parents are very, very humble, working class people. They didn't have any grand. They didn't talk about art or surrealism stuff. But my mother loved she loved poetry, or what she would have thought of as poetry, and she got me hooked on books like Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz, and she even used to read them to me, and she was always talking about words and poetry and that sort of thing. I feel like perhaps it's very simplistic to say this, but my dad inculcated a love of music and my mother inculcated a love of language, which serves a guy who writes songs very well, because, as you know, you want to look at Bolan and Bowie. You want to have the words and the music,
Yes.
not just one or the other. And so I felt like I got one from one and the other thing from the other.
Yes, amazing, actually. But then when you got to 16, this was 1970 probably.
70, yeah.
Yes. So the 60s, you'd have seen this kind of change, wouldn't you? You'd have been hearing this kind of amazing music.
Oh yeah. I would like from the moment the Beatles first appeared on TV, I was in, and I loved the way the older generation, I hated that. Not my mum and dad, but all of my relatives who all arrived in Australia. It was one of those big extended families where all the relatives could discipline all the kids. Nowadays, if I went round my brother's house and his kids were playing up and I said, what the fuck do you think you're doing? He'd be like, what are you can't talk to my kids like that. But in those days, all the rellies and all of them could sort of hand out, not physical discipline, but they could do that as well, but they could hand out. And they were really stuck in this 50s black and white world. And the first time the Beatles came on and they're all going, oh, why don't they wash their hair? They look dirty to me. I don't know what they're singing. I was in, even if I... and then, of course, I love... Who doesn't love the fucking Beatles? I mean, and yeah, I watched the whole world change. And seriously, I had the Sgt. Pepper's moment walking along a school corridor in 1967. I hear this strange music. I go in this room. There's my English teacher, Sandra Alexander. And she's got a little portable record player. And she says, come in, Stephen. And there's some other groovy kids from my class. I'm going, what's this? This is Sgt. Pepper's. And in that moment, it's like, fuck. Like everything changed. Like even a 13-year-old nong like me could hear that. Everything was changing right before our eyes. And I bought records, and it was singles and stuff, more than albums. I loved it, but I didn't fall in love until Mark Bolan, and that's when that changed from loving the music to having pictures on the wall and idolizing someone. And it for me, Bolan created a world. The album T-Rex, which is my favorite album, which should have contained Ride a White Swan and Hot Love, but didn't, because he wasn't putting singles on the albums, but it was contemporaneous with that. That album, that was a world to me. I went in my room, I closed the door, I put that record on my record player, and I entered a world. And Bolan showed me, he spoke to me of everything. He reconciled Greek mythology and cars and love and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, all the things I love. Bolan reconciled it all, and it rocked.
Yes.
It, even in its primitive level, on that record, before he had all the stuff, there was rock and roll. Might have been just one electric guitar and some bongos, but it rocked. And so things were constantly changing. But with Bolan, I entered my sort of like I was a devotee.
Yes, absolutely. You managed to, even though you were when you were 16, obviously very conscious of the music scene, the death of like Jim Morrison, Hendrix, Janis Joplin the year before, Brian Jones. I mean, the breakup of the Beatles, you must have been kind of thinking, oh, the 70s, I'm coming of age. Oh dear, this has kind of ended on a bit of a downer. We had, Charles Manson, Altamont. So you sort of transitioned into the sort of glam 70s world kind of seamlessly without too much worry about what.
Yeah.
Did...
With Bolan in my world, I didn't really care about any of that other stuff. It's very hard to sort it all out. What all came first, but Bolan was the alpha and the omega to me.
Yes.
To go, and it was so hard in those days. Everybody talks about this. You couldn't just, when you discovered Mark Bolan, I walked into a record shop one day and saw him and Mickey Finn on the cover of that album. I knew I would love it, and I bought it. But then you go home, how do you find out about him? So, you buy NME and Melody Maker every week and the American magazines, but they don't always, it's hard to catch up on all the stuff that happened before. It's hard to even know what records are available. And then one day I stumbled in a record shop and I found The Beard of Stars, the album before T-Rex. And wow, that was a beautiful album too. Not quite as fully realized. It was still... And then one day, wonder of wonders, I went in a record shop and found out that EMI had released My People Were Fair and Prophet, Seers and Sages on a double album. And gradually you catch up, and then one day you get a copy of you go in a weird record shop in some strange place, and there's Unicorn. And then but you never... It's very hard, the information. And there was something really good about this as well. When you discovered him, you just couldn't, like nowadays, say someone was to discover me, say, they could instantly know everything about me. In 5 minutes, they'd know where I was born, heroin addiction, I've got 5 daughters, I moved to Australia, blah, 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 blah. You could find all that. But when you fell in love with someone in those days, you didn't mean you could know everything about them. So there was this ongoing process between me and my friend trying to piece together all the bits and pieces, like sharing information. And he would ring me up, do you know Mark? Blah, blah, blah. We talk about him like he was our mate, And then one day, we both got the slider, and he went home and he rang me up sadly and he said, it's hard to admit, but the slider is really, it's not really happening, is it? It's like, and Slider's a good album compared to some of the stuff that came after that, but it just got worse and worse and worse. Finally, I bought Zinc Alloy and the Hidden Riders of Tomorrow, or A Creamed Cage in August, and I heard the lyric, Uncle Bimbo drank up the Sea of Galilee, and like a fool he gave it all to me, but I'm sly and I slide in the mud, just like Gardenia and the Mighty Slug. And I went, that's it. That's it, Mark. I'm not, no, but fuck that. Fuck that. You've lost it. You've lost it. But as sad as I was, and as I mentioned before, I was learning the proto-me that had found a way forward, how I could, because I couldn't compete. I couldn't play lead guitar like Jimi Hendrix. I couldn't be a macho man like the singers in Deep Purple and Free. Yeah, baby, that's not me. But when I see this fey little guy singing about mythology and fauns, and I go, hey, this is my way forward, And then of course Bowie as Bolan's waning, Bowie comes along, and man, he's got it all going on. So luckily, yeah.
I was going to say, did you find it a bit amazing that Bowie managed to release kind of one album a year? And they're all quite different as well, aren't they? As well as making films, doing stage plays, producing a few other people's work, doing world tours, different
Well,
relationships. I mean, do you find that slightly boggling?
I find it amazing now. At the time, because it wasn't an info world, it was like you didn't really know. And by the time I caught up with Bowie, there was already my friend Paul, this guy I'm talking about. He came round one day and he gave me Ziggy Stardust, and he also gave me a bootleg of which became Live in Santa Monica. And at first I resisted it. And I'm like, oh, this can't take... I was conflicted. And then when I really got into it, he came round and went, well, here's Hunky Dory, here's The Man Who Sold the World, and here's Space Oddity. And then not very much longer after that, bang, out came Aladdin Sane, and then Pin-Ups. But it was hard. I remember I'm only 17 and I'm a kid living in Canberra, going to school.
Yes.
I couldn't, but looking back on it now, that incredible year where he did Transformer and Mop the Hoople, Aladdin Sane, it's mind-boggling that the guy was so fucking on. It must have been so incredible to be so on, to be able to just do all that. He's so good at everything. It makes me sick. He was so fucking such a beautiful looking man. And by the way, I'm not gay and never have been. I'm totally heterosexual. But I was in love with these guys. I such a beautiful man, such an amazing singer, such an incredible melodicist, can play all the fucking instruments. We heard that on Diamond Dogs. Bowie played all the instruments. He didn't play bass and drums. He plays all the guitar and keyboards and mellotrons and the saxophone. He can write music, goes on stage. He's like, can do everything. It's mind-boggling. Like will not see the like of him again. A guy who can do everything, which he could do, and was still charming, and didn't seem to all go to his head. Not in the way it did with Bolan. Of course, we learn afterwards he struggling with this and that and financial problems, but he seems to remain a sort of a decent person.
Yes.
Throughout all of this. It's an absolute. It's like that he would have all of these qualities all embodied within one man. It's extraordinary.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of, that's why it's such a fascinating thing to study. So when you but had you left school at 16, or did you?
No, I went on to 18, and then in those days I didn't even know, in Canberra, 1972. I didn't even know there was such a thing as the dole or unemployment benefits. I only heard about that when the Sex Pistols came out. In my day in Canberra in 1972, when you left school, you went into the public service. And the public service was like a vast playground, especially for some ne'er-do-well like me, where I found myself ensconced in a job where I didn't really have to do much. And I spent my time on the phone, organising bands and rehearsals, or gossiping with my friend Paul about whatever Mark and David were up to. Indeed, an import record shop opened near my office, like a few blocks away, and I'm going to the toilet, and I just go down the import record shop and spend my wages on buying imported records, because not all of the records got released in Australia. And if they did get released, they often got released in flimsy covers with, like, all the bad stuff you didn't want. The import record shops bring them from England, America. That's where you got the real records. Yes. And then, of course, I was spending all my money on. Not only was I a bass player, I had to have a bass guitar and an amplifier, I was also a singer. And in those days, the singers had to have their own PA. And so I had my own PA, and I had my own microphones, and I had to have a vehicle to drive all this shit around in, to play to all the people who didn't even want to see me anyway, because a guy in Canberra in 1973 writing his own glam rock, and I had a whole glam rock. I was writing songs. You wouldn't believe it. Some of it survived and actually came out on a record called Baby Grand. This terrible group I had recorded loads of demos. Someone put them all together and released it. But that's how I spent my time, hanging around in the public service. They couldn't sack you. My boss was very ruefully said to me one day, he said, "I wish I could sack you. I don't care that you don't do anything, but you stop all the other people from doing stuff with all your shenanigans." So yeah, that's what I did, and I stayed there, and then I stayed there for a while, from 1973, 1978. In 1978, me and my then partner came to England, where I came back to England. We hung around in London for 3 months, and we took it all in. And she took in the fashion, and I took in the music. And when we got back to Canberra, we said, "Fuck this, we can't be here." And we moved to Sydney, and she became quite a famous fashion designer. And I started the church. By this time, I had a 4-track tape recorder. I'd stopped being in bands, but I had a 4-track tape recorder, and I was making pretty good demos. I learned how to use it, and I learned how to get the best out of myself, how to double track my voice. And I learned, and I made really good demos, and I met musicians and formed a band. And within a year, we were on TV, and everybody loved us.
Yes. Just going back slightly, though, how did you cope or get excited or not excited about that kind of moment where punk rock started to appear with people like, I don't know, Dr. Feelgood, the Ramones, Doctors of Madness, then
Doctors
obviously...
of Madness. The Doctors of Madness. Dr. Feelgood, don't care for. Ramones, yeah. Ramones are like a one-trick pony, and at the bottom of it, too stupid for me. At the time I could, I want to beat on the brat with a baseball bat. Yes. The whole song. Yeah, like an interesting flash, but nothing I could devote my life to. Doctors of Madness, a different thing. I love the Doctors. I love the Doctors of Madness. They were one of the bands I saw. I saw their last ever concert. Right. At the music machine. Richard Strange, Mr.
Strange. Yes.
I met him later on. I was such a fanboy. I don't think I made a very good impression. I was like one of those excited fanboys that gushed and raved, and he was like, really? But I love the Doctors of Madness. They're especially their first 2 albums. I love the rise and fall of Richard Strange too. I love the scope of that. I love the scope of that. I love Richard Strange. I love Cockney Rebel. I'm sorry. At the time, he wasn't very popular. I liked that. I also had a lot of time for Bill Nelson and Bebop Deluxe, right? Who I absolutely loved. I still listen to a lot of those records.
What about Brinsley Schwartz?
No.
Nick Lowe?
No. Not interested in pub rock. I'm only interested in musicians that are doing something to me that's extraordinary. And when I say that, I'm not interested in guys going down the pub, or singing about politics and shit. I want danger. I want Lady Grinning Soul every time.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I want this, and I want that from my books, and I want that from my TV, and I want that from my paintings. I want this thing. I want the decadence, the intelligence, the art. I want the supernatural. I want ghosts. I want gods. I want magic. I want heroes. I'm not interested in that ordinary stuff. I mean, I don't begrudge people who like Nick Lowe and Brinsley Schwartz or Elvis Costello, but to me, they're as boring as all fuck. And as far as punk rock goes, I like Anarchy in the UK. At the time, of course, I bought all those records. I had fucking Eater singles. I had, you know what I mean? Like, because it was new and exciting, I bought it all. But in the cold light of day, did I really go on playing it? No. I played the Sex Pistols album. I loved the way the Clash looked. I thought Paul Simonon was the ultimate rock star. I loved the way they looked, and I loved their get-ups and their zip shirts and Rebel Truce, the stencils and all of this. In reality, they're not a very popular thing to say, and I actually saw them play. In reality, their music was kind of limited, and Joe Strummer, an amazing guy, and I understand and appreciate what he did, but it was sort of, whoa, 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 whoa. It's not for me. I want this other thing that these other guys did. I also love television. I felt like television, because they were a long time coming. We were hearing about television before you actually could get yet. For 3 years, I read about television before I even heard anything. But I loved television, and strangely enough, I really like Bruce Springsteen too. He really appealed to me, and of course, at the same time, and a band called Metro. I don't know if you've ever heard of those. Of course, Bowie did Criminal World. I loved Metro. That was an incredible album. Peter Godwin and Duncan Brown. Did you hear Metro?
No.
Oh, you've got to track that one down. I kind of like Roxy Music too, but their first album I find really tiresome. But I also loved prog rock. Peter Gabriel and Genesis. I love The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and Foxtrot. I like some of the things Yes were doing. At the same time, I was still following, Dylan and the Beatles. It wasn't, my world wasn't exclusive.
No.
I demanded intelligence. I can't abide stupid stuff like AC/DC and that sort of stupid, idiotic stuff. And of course, the Stones. All the while, the Stones were always important to me.
Yes. What about people like Radio Birdman and the Saints?
I bought those records, but I like Radio Birdman more than the Saints. The Saints were amazing. That there was a band in Brisbane in 1976 making this wonderful, violent, incredible music. But I mean, would I? And look, I don't want the things I say seem to carry, or can seem to carry, this weight. But it's just I'm just a geezer in a pub. Imagine you've just met me in the pub and you go, "What do you think of the Saints? You're from Australia," and I go, "I would never fucking put a Saints record on these days." It's just like it was kind of bluesy pub rock. It was great that Australia had something like that, and I'm Stranded is a kind of a galvanizing and great song, but I don't absolutely love it. If you talk about Australian bands, of course the Go-Betweens and the Triffids, I kind of had a lot of respect for.
Well, absolutely.
And I actually collaborated with Grant McLennan from the Gobies, and we made 2 records together.
Nice. Just on the Bowie thing, because he did something called the 1980 Floor Show, didn't he?
Yes.
And he had a band who was supporting him or were part of that called Carmen. Did they ever come into your consciousness?
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. No, I heard about them, I read about them, but I would never... Because in those days, it was so much harder to be a dilettante. If you wanted to know about Carmen, it meant you had to go in a record shop and plonk down $10 or whatever it was that you had to either get off your dad or worked hard for it. Well, not worked hard, but spent the hours at work getting the money. So at Carmen, no. I noted Bowie was a bit of an aficionado of them, but I don't know much about them. No,
just Cherry Red Records brought out their 3 CD box set, and I did an interview with a couple of the members. And I was just curious to hear about that evening. And there was Klaus Nomi, wasn't there? And
Klaus Nomi, the first rock star to die of AIDS.
Yes, and he was there with Bowie, wasn't he? They put on that sort of suit that Bowie stood in front
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
which was quite with Joey Aria, who was the other guy next to him. So I don't know, anything to do with Bowie, I always go and have to explore it and poke it about
It's
a bit.
definitely a good recommendation if the Thin White Duke liked it. Probably
Yes.
you and I will as well.
Yes. So when the 80s trundled around in the UK,
Yeah.
in like 79, Thatcher gets in, then we have the
Yeah.
Falkland War, the miners' strike,
Yeah.
Greenham Common, we think we're all going to be nuked. What was it like for you during, navigating that period? Because you've been in the UK.
I don't care about that. I don't. My world is 100% music. I don't. All of that stuff dimly. Nowadays, yes, I'd be like, what? What's going on in this world? In those days, it was like, why do I care about a miners' strike in fucking England when I'm sitting at home listening to Scary Monsters? I don't like political music. I don't like Billy Bragg. I'm not interested. If I want politics, I'll go to a newspaper. I don't want it so pre-digested for me. And Lennon did all of that so much better, I think. I don't. I'm blissfully ignorant of what went on in England with Thatcher and the miners' strike and the Falklands War. Didn't touch my narcissistic little world a bit. I'm just music. It's just music. That's all I care about. I don't, that guy, not me now. Obviously, I'm invested in this world a lot more. But in those days, it was like music, like Falklands War. Yeah, but, what's so-and-so, what's so-and-so doing right now? What's his latest EP like? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely. So when the church kind of got together, the early 80s, did the stars all line up beautifully and things started to sort of move quite quickly at this time?
Yes. Because of the 4-track, because before that I didn't really know how to write good songs. Although I'm not really a gifted musician as such. I'm a thinker. I analyze all the time. I'm listening to Bolan and Bowie. I'm trying to figure it out. How can I do this in my own way? I'm not stupid enough to want to completely just latch onto it and do what they did. I've got to find out why it appealed to me. I listen to David Bowie and I love it. That wasn't enough for me. I have to go deeper and find out why do I love it. When I got my 4-track tape recorder, I started understanding how I could make music that would make people fall in love with me like they did with Bowie and Bolan. Not to such a great extent because I'm not as extraordinary as those guys, and nobody is. Steve Harley wasn't, Bill Nelson wasn't. None of them were. They were all moved by what Bowie and Bolan could do, and he opened the doors and showed us all the way how to do it. With my 4-track tape recorder, I crystallized that vision of what I wanted to do. And then I could, instead of, you imagine before that, I would meet guys and I'd say, I've written a song, and they'd say, play it. Let's hear the song you've written. I'd sit down with not a great guitarist, still not, sit down with my guitar and play it. Oh, Jesus, C, an A minor, but when you could actually put in a cassette and go, listen to this, knuckleheads, and the song that I'd worked on and carefully manicured and had, double track vocals and flanging and reverb and delay and all of the things that I learned to use. When I could do that, I had these guys, they were all in thrall, and they're like, wow. They could see I wasn't a very good singer. I wasn't a very good bass player. I'm still not. But I have this vision that not many people have. Like I could understand how to reach into people and make them be interested in what I did, which and hang on to them, and then they'd be interested. And I learned to create a world, or I was trying to create a world, had an ambition to create a world. So when you put my record on, you could kind of enter into my world. The first record wasn't so good at that. But I think the second record, The Blurred Crusade, was a really beautiful record, and it contained a world. And so, yes, in 1980, we put this band together. Peter Coppice was a guy, the lead guitarist that I'd already played with, and he kind of believed in my songs. He was a really great guitarist. So I had my sort of Mick Ronson character there, a guy who could translate my musical ideas into actual really good playing. We met Marty Wilson Piper. We had an idiot drummer, a stupid Aussie guy who was violent and crude and rude. He got kicked out, and we got this wonderful son of Dutch migrants, Richard Ploog, who was only 18. He joined in late 81, and we had our merry men. All of us kind of good looking, and everything aligned.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I had a brother who was 7 years older than me, and he was very into prog rock, the sort of, yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, Barclay James Harvest, the solo work of Rick Wakeman. Plus he had a few other albums which I thought were amazing, Sgt. Pepper and also Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. But I've always had that little bit of love for prog, which obviously in the 80s I sort of, put to one side and denied all knowledge. But it's interesting because prog has obviously been part of your sonic background as well, hasn't it?
I, like you, David, I like Peter denying Jesus on the cross. I denied prog. I did. I never. No, prog rock, I never liked it. Oh, no.
Roger Dean, who's he?
Yeah. No, for a little while. But prog is part of my DNA. Not some of it is. The grandiose, like at the end of Heart of the Sunrise, when I feel lost in the city, and the mellotrons swell up, and it's like classical music. It's like these grandiose and beautiful moments, or when it all breaks down, like the Lamia on Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, when the way Peter Gabriel would sing. These moments, these beautiful melodic moments, I embrace. I did not embrace, and I still do not embrace, gratuitous time changes and playing in weird time signatures. I don't want to make music to be admired. I want to, some of that, it was like you couldn't love it. You could only just stand back and go, wow, that's incredible, but it doesn't bring me any pleasure. So I've sort of taken the things from prog I wanted, but I don't embrace, and I only embrace the very best prog. So like Yes and Genesis, your Barclay James Harvest and all that, I thought was stupid. I also embrace krautrock, and I love the best of krautrock, Armand Duel, of course Kraftwerk, and Faust and stuff. I was always interested in all these subgenres. When Cabaret Voltaire and Thomas Lear and all of this stuff came along in England too, I was very much Ultravox. Love John Fox. Still love John Fox. He's another one, like a guy like me, same age as me, Bowie, the Beatles, and amazing lyrics and stuff that he was doing. Of course, the English press didn't really like him. The English press didn't like a lot of this stuff. They didn't like the Doctors of Madness. They didn't really like Steve Harley much either. But it's interesting. It's interesting watching all these trajectories of these people. But the music press doesn't always understand everything when it comes out. To me, a lot of people got a lot of kudos that I didn't think deserved it, and a lot of people who really I thought did deserve kudos and good reviews didn't get it. But that makes a fan like me more fanatical, which is what a fan is, a fanatical person. So the more the hatred was piled on the Doctors of Madness, and they got really bad reviews back in the day. for being pretentious, and nobody could really understand it, what they were doing. And they were kind of bridging. They were a proto-punk band in many ways, with the hair and the stupid names and the sort of destructive and wild music. But the press can't always understand everything that's happening, and I realise that as well.
I did an interview with Richard a few years ago, but he said that they were like 5 years too early for punk. But everybody in the audience formed punk bands and were there, at the right time, at the right place. So,
like TV Smith.
Yeah, so he sort of sowed the seed. So by the time it happened, he felt at the grand age of probably 25 or 26, he was too old and was already bored with it. But everybody in the audience were just coming of age, and obviously they took the pattern.
There you go. Yeah,
but I did find the source of prog rock, via David Bowie, because I was kind of curious with Bowie in the 90s, because he started talking about a slightly Scottish prog band called Clouds, or 123, and he sort of mentions this particular band and this artist. So I managed to get an interview with this guy, and he talks about Bowie, because the band starts in about 1967. He plays keyboards, and Bowie would hang out with him as a sort of dedicated fan, knowing that this guy was kind of like, and the band were kind of movers and shakers. And again, the audience was made up of all these people who went on to form the prog bands of the 70s. But yes, he's got some quite interesting stories of David just hanging on his coattails as he was introduced to sort of people like Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that. So
wow.
There you go. So if you sort of Google David Bowie Clouds prog band, you'll find a bit of story about it. But it's quite interesting that he was always very curious on everything, because actually it's very hard. I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear what this band sounded like. But basically, Bowie's just, so this guy has a moment in the sort of late 60s where he just gets really fed up, smashes equipment, never plays music ever again, and then goes and gets a job. And then in the 90s, Bowie starts talking about them, and people start knocking on his door saying, "This David Bowie keeps talking about you. Were you in a band?" And he's like, "What? Well, I was, but that was decades ago." And it's, well, he keeps saying that you were one of these influential people. And so there you go.
Too late. Too little, too late. Too little, too late. Go.
So I think he even he got invited by David to sort of meet up sort of at one of these exhibitions to say, "Remember me in 1967? He said, "Yes, you just hung out with me to yes," because he was curious with him. But then, the 80s progressed. So look, 83 for me is one of those magic years, because it's when the Smiths appear. Were you conscious of the 80s indie scene in the UK at this stage?
Well, yeah, I was always conscious of it. However, now, no longer being a fan, now being a participant, I found it hard to enjoy other people that much. And this is heretical, but I had the first couple of Smiths albums. I'm sorry, they don't mean that much to me. It's like, it's so very, I don't know, namby-pamby sort of.
Yes.
I don't know. It doesn't do anything for me. Sorry. I can see why Britain embraced them to its bosom. Her bosom. I guess Britannia.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess, but I mean, I liked the first album. It was nice, and Morrissey had a nice singing style. It was very soothing, and the music was kind of inventive and stuff. But when I read these things where English critics get together and go, "The greatest album ever made is The Queen is Dead," I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't do that for me. But I'm just the guy in the pub, David, next to you, going, I don't really care for the Smiths. I'm not saying the Smiths are no good. I'm saying not really my cup of tea. And whatever whatever they do now, I have no interest in whatsoever.
No,
And Matt
absolutely.
Morrissey seems to be. I don't really follow much about him. Every now and then on Facebook, I'll read some of his outbursts, and I think what an ugly old sod he's turned into as well. Like a very, like you know, just a hopeless ugly. But people, especially in America, they're just so besotted with him that they forgive all this stupid stuff. But I don't give a fuck about him or Johnny Marr.
No, absolutely. But then I was just thinking in terms of, you had that punk period, you had post-punk with all those
Yeah,
scratchy bands, and then there was a
yeah,
little bit of a moment. There was a bit of New Romantics, a bit of goth, the Blitz
yeah,
Kids.
yeah,
But then I think it was not just the Smiths, but there was a moment for 5 years in the UK. Indie pop becomes a thing,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
There's all
yeah,
those
yeah,
bands like the
yeah,
June Brides, the Go-Betweens, the Triffids,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
Chills, and
yeah,
indie kids, those 16 to 18-year-olds, suddenly were awash with this
yeah.
sound, this sensitivity. We loved everything but the girl, Julian Cope, all that kind of stuff. And I
Julian
suppose,
Cope, I love.
and the church,
Teardrop Explosion. Yeah,
the
I
church
love
would
it.
have fitted into that.
We kind of did. We kind of did. But as the thing I said before, you can't underestimate this if you're thinking about what I care about. At this time, I was now a player in the game. I wasn't a guy looking on from the sidelines. I was playing in the game. And if somebody came along who was successful and everybody loved, I didn't like that. Like I wanted that to be me. So suddenly all of my judgment was clouded by being in competition with all of these people, which is absolutely ridiculous, of course. But that's the way I saw it. I was in competition. Why are they getting a good review and not me? I'm no longer just a disinterested spectator. I'm taking it all very personally. And so now my point of view is completely clouded by the fact that these people are competing with me in the charts for reviews at the venue in Victoria, in Melbourne, in London. Wherever I'm going, I'm now competing with all these people. I'm
Yes.
competing with indie pop in England. I'm competing with the underground Paisley movement in America or whatever it is. So my point of view is now very clouded, and maybe I couldn't have loved David Bowie as much as I loved him if I had encountered him when I already had my own career going. Maybe it just would have overwhelmed me how good he was. As it is now, I could pay obeisances to him because I was a mere nothing. I was just a fan. But if I'd encountered him, and maybe I'd been 5 years down the track and already a singer and writing songs, I might have reacted with hostility. That
Yes.
is the nature. But envy and stuff is the kind of the spur that drives me along.
Well, also I think with that generation, they were like people that when you were at school, at college, they were in a different age group, weren't they? They weren't the same age as you. You didn't have that
No,
slightly competitive. God, they're my age, and
yeah,
they've
yeah,
got a Rolls Royce, or they've got a
yeah,
mansion, they've got a model girlfriend, or whatever. There is the comparison of people your own age is quite weird when you're young. Whereas people who are 5 or 10 years older, they're in a different world, aren't they?
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So my opinion about the fucking June Brides or whoever is really is irrelevant. It's all mixed up with jealousy and envy and
Yes.
scorn and regrets and stuff. Yeah, I believe this might amuse you and your listeners. I believe if my parents hadn't fucking moved to Australia, I might have been a lot more successful in England than I was. If I had been an Englishman making music in London, I believe I could have possibly done better than I did. I believe that sort of coming from Australia and being perceived as Australian, a lot of our early articles were like, stuff about Bruce, kangaroos and stuff. But I believed if they'd left me there, and I had grown up in England, and because I was, making music from an early age, I believe I would have, who knows, I could have met Mick Jones or something, wandering around London, as I would have been instead of wandering around Sydney, and my trajectory would have been completely different. And,
Yes.
and the British press would have seen me in a different light. But that is only mere conjecture. And it's a stupid fantasy to have. If only my parents had stayed fucking put instead of coming to Australia. It was very hard when I started off, and the music that I wanted to play was very hard to find cohorts.
Yes.
Because in Australia in 1972, people were, I don't know, they weren't really hip to all the stuff going on in London. I just imagine if I'd been 18 in London in 1982, who I could have met and who I could have played with and the sort of things I might have done. But I will never know.
No, this is true. So when you came to sort of the mid-80s, you were doing Heyday and then Starfish.
Yeah.
I mean, most bands I've noticed, especially the 80s bands, they have a 5-year narrative. They get together, 12-month honeymoon period. John Peel plays a single, then they get a John Peel session. They get a first album, tour the country in their transit van. Then the second album, things going well. By the third album, 4 or 5 years in, things are starting to sort of get a bit tricky. How was your narrative at this stage? You're sort of nearly 5 years in with the band, making your fourth album.
Well, we had, miraculously enough, we had these big record companies propping us up. And I mean, the band all hated me and each other by this stage, but everybody hung in there because it seemed like just around the corner was going to be this big payday. Not just a heyday, but a payday, David.
Yes.
It seemed, so we hung in there, even though we all hated each other, and the other guys wanted to be the singers and they wanted to write their songs and stuff. I partially solved that problem on a Heyday by saying, and rightly so, and not just to solve a problem, but I was like, hey, you guys are bloody great musicians. Let's write the music together. So on Heyday, the band stopped being me writing all the songs, and we started a system which was very good for us, I think, which gave the band it gave us a lot better dimension. No way was I as good a guitarist as those guys. No way could I dream up stuff that would be as good as them. The whole band wrote the music together with me playing bass and controlling things and editing things and going, no, not this one. Yes. Now that riff you're playing now, that's it. Yes, let's work on that. And then we went forward into the future like that, with me not being the sole songwriter, but with me being the sort of the controller and the editor and writing the lyrics and being the singer, but allowing the guitarist and the drummer to kind of do the things that they knew better than me what to do. So, we were always, Marty and I being English. Marty was very English. He had just arrived in Australia like 3 weeks before he joined the church. We were hurt and upset by a lot of the rejection in England, and the press were very, very cruel and dismissive. It's funny, they're not anymore. We get reviews in magazines. The church's reviews now are 8 and 9 and sometimes even 10. And then I pick up the magazine, but everybody's getting 8 and 9 and 10. All of those nasty reviewers have all gone.
Yes.
And it was very amusing when I wasn't a player to read someone get a really bad review. For example, Split Enz put out an album called Time and Tide, and the review simply said tame and tired. These guys worked on their album slave away on it for 6 months, and it comes out in England, and the biggest magazine in England goes, tame and tired. That's the only review got. That's kind of amusing when you see that happen to someone else, but it's really, and there were, of course, there are these guys, Mr. Nasty. Remember all of those guys?
Yes.
And for a little while, I got a little bit of that too. My sort of arrogance and stuff didn't go down well, and we got some really bad reviews. So I'm just saying that really hurt us. In America, they always kind of loved us. We hardly ever got a bad review in America. And because we're from Australia, in those days, they didn't really differentiate that much. If you were from England or Australia, if you were a foreigner and you had a bit of a different accent, that was good enough. So in America, things always kind of went well for us, but not well enough to make us superstars, but well enough that we could tour there and pay our way. And when one record company dropped us, another one would pick us up.
So when you were doing Starfish, you recorded this in LA, didn't you?
Yeah.
Was this quite a major moment to sort of go, right, guys, we're going to go to LA. We're going to do this in a different studio, and with Waddy Wachtel, who was Stevie Nicks. Oh, Wachtel.
Yeah.
Is this Stevie Nicks' right-hand man guitarist?
That's right.
Oh.
And later to play with Keith Richards in the Expensive Winos.
Yes.
Yeah, they brought something, they took something away. Accidentally, we kind of made it. But like I had this song, I had Under the Milky Way. I think whoever had the version that we put out is pretty much just like my demo version. I wrote this song. I'd like to think no matter who produced that song would have probably been a hit. It's just one of those songs. I accidentally wrote a song that was more universal than what I would normally write. And
Can you remember how it started and where you were sitting when it began?
Absolutely. It's a famous story now in Australia because this song is like, Under the Milky Way is one of, if not it's the most synced Australian song of all time. It was voted by readers of the Australian newspaper the most popular song of Australian song of all time. So in Australia, I'm forced to recount this endlessly. Like, you can come on my radio show, and you can flog your latest record that nobody really likes, as long as you will talk about Under the Milky Way. I was at my mother's place, and she had a piano in a garage that belonged to my brother, and I was there with my Swedish girlfriend, who became my partner and was the mother of my oldest twins before we broke up, before the song we wrote went to my head so much that we fell apart. I could see the washing up was coming, and I thought I'd run away. I went out in the back garden and left Corin with my mother. So my mother would be going, you can imagine my mother and Corin having this conversation as they wash up, and Corin being Swedish wouldn't have understand any of the sort of, my mum's like, imagine a character from sort of Steptoe and Son going, oh, Mrs. Barnes's lumbago's really playing up at the moment, Corin. I don't know. She needs some Cross and Blackwells. And the Corin would go, oh, yeah. Meanwhile, I ran off and went in the garden and smoked a joint and sat down at the piano and wrote this little chord progression. And by the time she came out there, she said, oh, that's good. And I went, yeah. And we sort of knocked up some words, and that was it. And I came home. When I got back in my studio, I did the demo that the band adhered to. And what sounded really good on the piano sounded much, much better. The chords and the bass line sounded so much more emphatic when it was transferred from being a piano playing the top line and piano playing the bass, when the top line was an acoustic guitar and the bass was a bass guitar. Somehow, even though it's the same notes, when it was on with two different instruments, it made all the difference. And I knocked up a demo, and when we got to LA, nobody really liked it. The band didn't like. I was writing so many songs. in those days in my little studio, I had an 8-track by now. I was knocking out songs like you wouldn't believe. And it was just another song on a tape, and nobody really cared for it. But our manager was insisting that it be on the record. And it wasn't really until Clive Davis heard it and he said, this is going to be a hit. And they kind of, it's hard to know if it was going to be a hit or him saying it's going to be a hit made it a hit. But then it was a hit, and then everybody suddenly sort of became aware of it. But up until that point, it was just a sort of a minor thing. When I was sequencing the album with Waddy, I had already planned that song would be second. And when I said I want this song second, he said, man, you don't want people hearing that song too soon. I'm like, what? Yeah, I don't think people should be hearing that one. He wanted to bury it on the graveyard position on all records, which is the second last song. Second or third, the third or second last song on a 5-track album. They were the kind of positions where you put the songs that weren't so good, and he wanted to put it there. But I kind of insisted. And then when Arista heard it and loved it, of course, it all changed, and everybody, in a great case of revisionism, including me, like, oh, wow, yeah, we already knew that. And one of those producers, not Waddy Wachtel, but the other guy, had the hide to come up to me, who made my life misery while we made that record.
Is that Greg?
Greg, clashing all the way down the line, like everything all the time. He had the hide to come up to me and said, if I knew this record was going to be such a hit, I would have been a lot nicer to you. It's like, what? You can't fucking make stuff like that up. But that's it. It was like an accident.
These always happen, don't they? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Yeah. I remember, talking to a few people who were on those classic albums. Was it Chris Spedding who was in hundreds of? He was in a lot of bands, Chris Spedding, but he was in
a great band called Sharks.
Oh, there's been a brilliant film with that. Have you seen the film?
I haven't seen the film. I'm really waiting to see it because I love Sharks. They were kind of like a free-ish. Well, they had Andy Fraser in the beginning. They had this great, they were a really great band. I had 2 of their albums, First Water and Jab It In Your Eye. You're spelt Yore, and they're marvelous records. I don't have those records anymore. They're hard to even listen to. You can't even really find them anywhere. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that film. I've been reading stuff about it on Facebook, but it hasn't come my way yet.
Yes, because he guessed. I did an interview with him, and he's played on hundreds,
millions of records. Yeah,
and he was on the Harry Nilsson. I can't live if living is without you. And I said, did you know at the time that was going to be such a hit? And he said, no way. All the songs you thought were going to be amazing weren't, and the ones you thought this is okay, but are the ones that are genius. And that was one of those ones. So you don't know, do you? Really?
You don't know. All my hits have been sort of accidents. Finally, the Church wrote a song trying to get a hit called Metropolis. It was our last sort of hit that we had. It was a bit of a hit in America, but it sounded to me, it sounds like a lot of the 80s, people are sitting down with some producer trying to write a hit because someone thinks this is what a hit should be. And we collapsed to that and wrote this song Metropolis, very much trying to write a hit, whatever that is. And it was a bit of a minor hit. But when I hear it, it just sounds like that. Like all of those, so much of that 80s stuff sounds like people writing songs trying to get a hit. It's like the tail wagging the dog,
yes,
like writing
this
songs
true.
a guy on the radio would play.
I know. So with the sort of that period of the late 80s, 87, 88, I mean, suddenly there's another, I think, shift in music because a lot of bands who've been together 5 years were breaking up because they just had enough. Then ecstasy comes along, which I think changes the musical landscape a bit because suddenly people are going to start dancing. There's the kind of Detroit, Chicago sound. You got that Manchester sound with the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses, Primal Scream. And then you had the Seattle grunge scene. So how were you kind of, I know you were in it, so you're not paying that much attention, but at the same time, were you sensing a musical change at this point?
Yeah, I was sensing a musical change every couple of years. It was rapidly evolving and devolving, and um, I very much felt grunge came along in like when we made our most. It's hard to describe this record. We made a record called Pre-Sequels Aura, and it was very Euro. It was very arty, and it was like very, the lyrics and the music and everything. So I had this really, I don't know, sophisticated feeling, to me anyway, incorporating everything I loved. And then grunge came along and completely blotted us out. And everybody wanted, once again, we turned back to sort of stupid stuff. Not Nirvana. Nirvana to me are like the Sex Pistols. They're like the original and the best. A lot of time for Nirvana, but all the stupid ones that came in the wake of blokes in flannelette shirts and long hair doing their thing, and it really affected the church, and sort of helped. It seemed to erase us. It seemed like that was it. It was all over. It's a bit frightening. It's like being a guy who fixes horses and carts and sells wagons, watching the first automobile drive up the street. All the time you're worried that this thing's going to come along and obliterate you. I shouldn't have been like that. I should have been more open-minded, but sort of, as all these different things would come along, they seemed to threaten my very existence in the music business. And the record companies would treat you like that as well. They would be like, "Oh, we don't care about you anymore. You're gonna get dropped. Your record hasn't sold, and everybody's listening to grunge now, or they're all listening to hip hop. Now they're all listening to Brit pop. Now they're all, and what are you supposed to do?" And I just, because I had nothing else better that I could possibly do, I just hung in there. And then not realizing if you just hang in there, one day the whole cycle goes around and people go, wow, now you're a vintage and a veteran. I read a review of a record that the Easy Action put out, and they say, "Psych Godfather," and I'll take that happily. But at the time when all of these things come along, Manchester and all these things seemingly obliterating your career, it's a really unpleasant thing to feel that something has come along and made you outdated. But, people in Australia were proclaiming us as dead in 1983. They were going, all their best works behind them. Back in 1981, they did some good stuff and they were good. But now in 1983, we've got so much other good stuff, and we realize now, the church were just a red herring. So all the way down the line until, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, when I just relaxed and went, fuck it all, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to do my thing. It seemed like the latest thing would completely obliterate you. And in a way it did. And you can see that, you can follow it right from the Beatles and how then all the Mersey pop bands would spring up, and then the Beatles do Sgt. Pepper's and obliterates Jerry and the Pacemakers and Dave Clark 5, and suddenly you've got, Tomorrow and all these bands, the Chocolate Watch Band and this, all of this stuff. And then the Beatles change again to something else, and all those bands are gone. And now we sort of want authenticity and wearing denim shirts. And then, and then prog comes along and obliterates that. And then glam comes along and obliterates that. And then new wave comes along, and then punk, and then blah, 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 blah. And rock and roll is a series of convulsions that seems to wipe out nearly everybody.
Yes.
As it goes. And that's great when you're looking on, it's really frightening when you're in the middle of it and thinking, my very livelihood, and more than just a livelihood, because you could always go and get a job or something, but my existence, all of my body of work or whatever is all seeming threatened by. So that's why as these things would come along, I couldn't just relax and like them. I was threatened by them because it could mean the harbinger of my doom.
Yes.
When the Stone Roses come along, and I couldn't understand at all what was so good about them at all. But I could realize that they were threatening my existence because they've got this funky drummer beat and they're sort of doing this whole other thing that I couldn't even understand or dig. So that's why that's why I would say up until about 1973, my views on rock and roll are just a fan looking on. And after that, they're so clouded by my own involvement in this thing.
Yes, God. I mean, it's existential, but the 90s existential angst, isn't it?
Yeah,
But the
the
90s,
90s, yeah.
you do still produce a lot of material, and
yeah, but that was my decade horribilis. I didn't like the 90s. I didn't like the music other people were making. I didn't enjoy the 90s at all. I did still carry on making music, but in a kind of a vacuum, in a sort of a people. I felt like I've been written off by everybody and nobody. For example, here's an example in a nutshell. When Pre-Sequels Aura, which I considered a magnum opus, I considered this like, wow, how could I do any better than this? When it came out, Rolling Stone in America gave it a very negative review, gave it 2 stars out of 5. And the guy said, I wish they could be more like REM. However, by 2000, Rolling Stone released a book of all their reviews. And now someone else has reevaluated Pre-Sequels Aura, and it gets 4.5 stars and said this was a masterpiece. How did we ever miss that? That's the vagaries of how this all works. But again, too little, too late. By that stage, I was sort of languishing in obscurity. If only they had seen that when I put it out, but they couldn't see it because there was grunge and there was Eddie Vedder and there were the Stone Temple Pilots, and music was kind of visceral and primitive and loud, and so someone making thoughtful music with kind of literary allusions and all of this stuff that I was doing was not in fashion. So that's the way. But if I didn't realize, if you just hang in there long enough and just keep doing what you're doing, maybe it can all come good in the end, and you come out the other end a vintage act. Just like if you hold on to your Ford Zephyr.
Well, it's interesting because now I think, especially with these compilations that come out, people archiving all their material, there's a passing of time which gives people a time to reflect and actually forget about, right, we're going to have to savage this album, we have to savage this band, and just listen to the music out of all the, and all the other stuff just gets pushed to one side. It's because no longer a zeitgeist moment, and it's no longer, where does this fit in? It's like, actually, this is just really good music. I don't, and it's kind of
There
interesting. Have you had a box collection of all your material?
I've had I have a few different careers. The Church have never had a box collection. I had a box collection of all my solo albums. Carlton at Easy Action is threatening a few boxes, so look out. Boxes are on their way. He loves boxes. But I have so much music that hasn't really come out to the wider world. There will be boxes.
There are going to be boxes. Yes.
There are going to be boxes, yeah. The Church, no one, because it's so complicated with all the different record companies we've been on, although there is a record company interested in swallowing them all up and then spitting them all out again. And there could be a box involved in that. But I would love that. I would love to see some boxes of the church.
Yes, well, absolutely. Did you at all, because your 90s, you were doing solo work as well as the church. Did you, looking at that work now, and you mentioned your 92 album, is it better than you can remember at the time?
I because of the internet and because of I've met people in those days. It's another thing you forget. You're working in a vacuum. You put out a record, a few critics savage it, and that's the end of it. It's not on the internet with church fans going, wow, have you heard what the church has done? There was none of that. So you're working in a vacuum. Since the internet's come about, and since I can be in contact with all these fans and, pages with people talking about our old record and stuff. And because I've let go of all that paranoia and fear that I had that I was going to be erased by a critic's pen in one go. I can see Priest Equals Aura was a good record, and the solo albums I was doing, they were all good. They were all valid, and so I've sort of got a new understanding of them. But I don't really listen to my old stuff much. But every now and then I'll smoke a joint and put an old record on. I have a girlfriend I've been with for 5 years, and she hasn't heard a lot of my old records. And sometimes the other day she said, I'm very curious about Priest Equals Aura, let's have a listen. So I put it on and we listened to it, and she was like, wow, that is a great record. And then listening to it through her ears, I was like, yeah, it was kind of good, wasn't it? I wasn't wrong about that. I thought it was a good record, and then all the negativity, I sort of didn't want to hear it anymore. But now listening to it through fresh ears and fresh people coming and saying, wow, I really love that record. I'm reappraising it and going, yeah, I was kind of on the right track. I think a lot more people would probably rather listen to fucking Priest Equals Aura than the Stone Temple Pilots these days. I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, I'm sure there's someone out there listening to Stone Temple Pilots every day and going, wow, this was the golden age of rock and roll.
Yes, I'm not sure. I think because the 90s finishes, because there is that sort of the grunge, post-grunge sound. It finishes with Woodstock 99, and I think that's where...
Oh,
that's not
what a shocker. Yeah.
It's not, it's a kind of... It sort of
What
makes you realise how far things had gone down after Kurt Cobain
I can't agree with you more. I was in America at the time, and I watched that, and then watching the movie they made about it a few years back. What a shocker! What a dark and horrible fucking moment that was, and all of the acts when you see them, the Insane Clown Posse. I mean, fucking who's getting up and listening to that in the morning? All that stuff. Yeah, it's a constant. We're constantly rock and roll, like everything else, constantly reassessing itself and realizing the mistakes made, and realizing that the wrong people sometimes got all the credit and the right people went unnoticed, or seemingly went unnoticed. So yeah, I do that with my music, and some of the old things I did, I think, were really excruciatingly bad as well. I don't think it's all great, but just circumstances conspire to obfuscate what you've really done. You never really understand. It's constantly being reassessed. Who knows if some futuristic superstar in 2026 comes out of the woodwork and goes, Priest Equals Aura, that was my Diamond Dogs for me. That was this album where this guy laid it all down this old obscure Australian guy. Maybe I will have my moment in the sun at last, or maybe not. I don't really care anymore either. It doesn't seem, it all suddenly doesn't seem so important. And
No.
I've kind of I've tried to embrace just being me and being content with what I do, instead of wanting to be striding the stages at Wembley and Madison Square Gardens. It's unlikely to ever happen. But
Yes.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Charles Sharp Murray, the NME writer in the 70s, and probably, but he does that review of Low, doesn't he? David Bowie's Low. And I don't know if you've ever sort of...
Oh, yes. No, I read it at the time. And he said, if Eno and Bowie are going to make music like this, I would rather they just exchange cassettes in the post. That's how that review finished. And he slagged off in his ignorance and in his, it's all about me. I know what David Bowie should be doing, and I like Suffragette City because I could play the chords. He in every article he wrote, he was so happy to tell you the chords of Suffragette City were A major and F major, which seems a kind of very ordinary old chord progression to Charles Shaar Murray, because he had his own band, the Blast Furnaces. And then Bowie makes this absolutely stunner of an album. Even stupid old me in Australia buys out a record and sits down and goes, holy fuck, this is like brilliant. It's unbelievably brilliant. He couldn't see it and he slagged it off. The Zeitgeist won again, David. The stupid old Zeitgeist that doesn't understand things. And initially, I talked to some record company about this. Initially in America, Low sold 15,000 copies. 15,000 copies for one of the most influential records of all time, and like a new high point in Bowie's career. The idiots in England were slagging off these so-called experts, Nick Kent and Charles Shaar Murray. They didn't understand. They couldn't dig it at all. They were so locked in the past. And, also feeling like they have to say something, locked into this thing of having to say something negative because it's sort of hip, and being iconoclastic. This need to stand up and say something that everybody loves is rubbish. So much. It's a world within a world within a world. Encyclopedias could be written about this sort of stuff. But yes, it's like the guy in London in the 16th century who wrote, William Shakespeare. Who's going to care about this in 5 years' time? History's littered with these critics making these grand pronouncements. They were so wrong, but that's fucking life, isn't it?
That is life. So like 10 years ago, you start to get much more appreciation because you're doing bigger tours, aren't you? You're starting to sort of become more of a band that people have started to appreciate more, and doing sort of world tours.
A little bit. No, but we were always doing world tours. We were always touring. We took some time off in America and touring overseas in the 90s when things got grim, and I had a lot of personal problems and stuff. But from 2000 on, the church seemed to do a tour of America every year. We don't get to Europe and England so much, but we've always been touring America. And I don't know. But definitely more people kind of appreciate us now. That's for sure. And the internet has helped with that. You can now hear all those old records. They were so hard to find. Some of them were impossible to find, but now it's all there and everybody can hear everything. And yeah, definitely, I feel more secure about my position, which is up just as a minor character in this rock and roll circus.
Yes.
Yes, I accept that. But still with a bit of a ticket in the lottery, because as I say, I live in hope that Joe Superstar from 2026 is going to go, man, the church were where it was at, and this guy Steve Kilbey, and they sort of, I'm sort of dragged from obscurity by this unknown futuristic rock star dropping my name, and I think I've got as good a ticket in that lottery as anybody else.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think if you got Taylor Swift to cover one of your numbers,
Yes, I say that. If only Taylor Swift would do Under the Milky Way, in so many ways, or Harry Styles, or I don't know, or of course the other big lottery ticket that all us old rockers were waiting for, running up that hill in Stranger Things. If Stranger Things or whatever the big TV show of next year would throw Under the Milky Way in there, I could be running hot again, and I'd be standing on stage and the kids would be screaming at me. No, I'm just joking with that bit.
No, but it's a nice one. But look, you've been very prolific, haven't you? You've had a solo album coming out, which is just coming out on Easy Action Records. Is that come out, or is that about to appear?
No, it's come out. Carlton from Easy Action took all my solo activities, because I've collaborated with lots of other people, and some of them are purely solo where I do everything, and some of them are with other players who've played stuff. And he's made this great compilation. I was very dubious until I actually heard it. I actually played it off iTunes. I was like, wow, all this very diverse stuff hangs together really well. And as I said, someone gave it a 9 out of 10 review, and called me the Psych Godfather.
Yes.
And so another ticket in the lottery. I do think there are a lot of people in England who would really like what I do, but they've never heard me or never heard of me even, and they don't know that I exist. But I think there are a lot of Bowie fans and people who like Bebop Deluxe and Steve Harley and the Doctors and all those bands. If they were to only but encounter me, they might really enjoy it. And they would go, wow, where's this? Like Carlton himself from Easy Action, who said, I accidentally came across one of your solo albums, started listening and going, wow, you've got all this stuff. You've been prolific. I've made almost 100 records, that you can actually that you could actually find on, say, iTunes or Spotify. I've got like 100 albums out there, and more coming as we speak. I got so many records sitting in the wings right now. So I feel like I've always got a chance. I feel not in an angry or bitter way, but I definitely feel there are people in England who would really like what I do, because after all, really the records I've made have been for England, because I'm English and the people I really adore are English, and all of my records are love letters to them. And I really believe that if people were to know about me, again, that there would be a lot more people enjoying what I do, and I could come to England with the church or on my own and not have to play Ma Murphy's fucking Dosh House and actually play a decent venue.
Yes.
I don't have ideas above my station, but I feel like I could come to England and do a tour and maybe play to a couple of thousand people every night. I don't have illusions about Wembley or anything, but I do think I'm sort of an undiscovered character in this whole grand opera of rock and roll. But it no longer fills me with bitterness or impatience or anger. And if it happens, great. And if it doesn't, I'm good with that too. And I no longer have the chip on my shoulder and the axe to grind,
Absolutely. And with this compilation that's come out, or collection on Easy Action, so this is a collection that they've put together for you. They've found the material, and they've got, because it's quite it has a nice sonic prog vibe running underneath it.
David, I've taken you. My phone. I've just had to plug my phone in, which means I had to unplug my earphones.
Oh yes, I got
Say
you.
that all again, and hopefully
No,
I'll
yes,
hear what
but
you
with
say.
this latest one, Premonition
hang on.
K.
Now
Oh. Do.
I guess I'm gonna have to plug back in with these. I can't hear what you play it out loud.
Oh, okay.
So I guess we're drawing to the end.
Oh, okay. Yes. So with this Premonition K that you've got, this one here.
Yeah.
So this
Maybe,
this was a sort of what your chap at Easy Action, he found the material, said if I put them together like this, we'll be able to get a very seamless album. No.
The record he's put together is called Bespoke Wheels and Winged Heels.
Right.
Premonition K is an album I made with an Australian guitarist and writer, but he doesn't write lyrics or sing. So he gives me the music and I put my vocals on top and I figure out what the album's going to be about. And he does all the hard work for me by writing the music and playing all the instruments. So I've collaborated with him. Carlton's releasing that. Carlton's trying to release everything I've ever done.
Yes.
He's trying to get it all out there. All of my solo records, all of my many collaborations. He's sort of haphazard, willy-nilly. He's just released an instrumental album that I'm not of mine that I did when I ran out of money. I chucked together a whole load of bits and pieces I had on my computer. But he's very enamored with that, and he's chucking that out as well, called Whispers in the Static. But the Winged Heels one hangs together, even though it's over 20 years and done under all kinds, 30 years, 40 years, I don't know. Yeah, back in 1986 till now, he's put all this very diverse and different stuff together on this one album, and it really hangs together really nicely. So I'm very grateful for that, and we're both hoping people might discover me in this way.
Yes, well, absolutely. This is fantastic. I mean, it's a great. I mean, for the record that has just come out, your solo. Who did the artwork and whose idea was it?
Which record are you talking about?
Premonition. Yes.
Okay, that's an English artist called Keith Donald, and he's obviously riffing on Hawkwind, who are another of my great loves that we didn't talk about. I also love space rock. So we didn't.
Do you love the work of Robert Calvert?
I love Robert Calvert. I came to London and saw him give a reading in a small room in Hampstead Heath where he read Fahrenheit, whatever this little book of poetry, some of which ended up on Quark, Strangers and Charm. I was in the room with about 40 people when he did this reading, and I love Captain Lockheed and Lucky Leaf and the Longships. I love the idea of Hawkwind as well, and
Yes.
I've tried to get that into the Bolan and the Bowie and the prog and the Beatles. I've taken all the things that I've loved, and they could all be regurgitated at any moment.
Yes.
So you will hear me doing tracks that are going boom, 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 and things are going whoa, whoa, whoa. Where I try and sort of musically describe space travel. You'll hear that as much as the glam elf.
And did you get into
stuff.
And did you dabble in the world of orgone energy and such like because of Hawkwind?
How do you do that? How do you get your hands on an orgone accumulator? I read about it. I'm interested in all these peripheral things. If a rock star that I loved mentioned something, I was out there. You know, the first time Patti Smith mentioned Rambo, I was trying to find a Rambo poetry book in Canberra, which was not easy in those days. You know, when all of these things get mentioned, which is the great thing about rock and roll for me, it turned me on to a load of things I never would have heard of otherwise.
No, absolutely.
You know, or
I got-
Aleister Crowley, or any of this stuff. It all kind of came via rock and roll.
And with your last Church album,
Yeah.
which has also just come out as well, which is
Yeah.
the Perfume guitar.
Erosita. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the one. So this is the
Yeah.
27th release that you've done, isn't it, of the band?
No, it's much more like the 40th, but that it's the 27th studio album as such. But there are acoustic albums, live albums, compilation albums, covers albums, records that only of outtakes and stuff that only came out on our own very tiny things. But it's like, I guess, the 27th official album, yes. But
Right.
there are a lot more Church albums than that, as the collectors will tell you, and it drives them mad because they think they have everything, and then they find out there's still one more thing.
There's still more.
Still more to get.
And have you got a band now that's up and running and could hit the road at any time?
Yes, I do. That's the current Church. Is only me left. All the others have gone. They all went off. They couldn't stand me or each other anymore. And now I've got a brand new band. They're all about 15 years younger than me, and they all were Church fans, and they behave themselves marvelously and are happy to be in the Church. And we move on with my heyday method, where we all write the music together. And then under my guidance, I decide, as I should, what is the Church and what isn't the Church. So when someone comes up with something, I go, no, that's not the Church. Someone else plays something, that's the Church. And we work on it together, and we tour together, and we live in happiness and harmony. And we're all equal members, and they're all really happy to be in the Church, and nobody begrudges me the fact that I'm the singer and the lyricist.
No.
Because that's the way it is. But the other guys, they started to begrudge that.
So a bit like Marky Smith, it could be you and your granny on bongos. That would be the Church.
Exactly, and I use that quote all the time. I use that quote all the time.
And does that sort of emotionally and spiritually free you up, just to sort of say, right, now we're on it?
It does, because I'm no longer. The other guys had such an agenda when I would come in and go, look, we're going to do this. Why should I do that? Because you say so. When I do it now, if they say no, I know they're saying it purely on a musical thing, like, Steve, that's not a good idea. You really want to do that? And then I can think about the compliments, and I can think about the brickbats that they might have when I'm saying, let's do this or let's do that. If the guys go, yes, we should do that, it's a real yes. And if they go, no, Steve, don't do that, I can really sit down and go, they don't have an axe to grind. We all just want what's best for the band. And that is marvelously freeing. And the people who see us now, as far-fetched as this may seem, people say this is the best version of the Church ever, because not everybody's a Johnny superstar. We're all workers in this thing, trying to make the Church the focus, not the individuals.
Yes.
And surprise, surprise, musicians who cooperate and collaborate works out a lot better than four individuals who are all at odds with each other over ego and money and girlfriends and drugs. And you trod on my toes once in getting on a bus, and I've never forgiven you. There's none. All that's gone, and now we're just players making this music.
Yes, my God, you're on a cosmic journey here, aren't you? So flicking to the solo plot, this is the third of your trilogy then, your Premonition one.
Yes. Although he and I have already made 8 albums before this or something, but I said, let's make this trilogy. But that, of course, begs the question, what will happen with the next record that won't be part of the trilogy? So it's only a very loose, and now Carlton from Easy Action wants to release the trilogy I believe, in a box set. So there you go.
Yes, it's quite brilliant, isn't it? I do love I mean, I love the style and I love the sound of that album. I think it's just been a delight, actually. I love the fact that you've also been influenced by the Pink Floyd album, The Final Cut, which I always thought was an amazing album.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, it says on your press release, it's haunting tones of Pink Floyd's The Final Cut.
That isn't me saying that. But if somebody wants to associate us with Pink Floyd, I got to take that one and be gracious. Pink Floyd, I love. The Final Cut, I don't love so much. I'm more of an obscured by clouds and metal kind of guy.
Yes.
But yes, definitely, people are hearing Pink Floyd in this. And Martin is very big, loves Pink Floyd. Everybody loves Pink Floyd. Very few people can turn that love into something to move forward with for themselves. I think Martin's kind of, if anybody can do it, Martin Kennedy, who is doing that. Is turning his love of Pink Floyd into something of his own a bit.
And did you, when you sat down to do this album, did you sort of have a very strong vision of how it was going to run?
No. I was down in Tasmania playing with the church, and I said to Martin, we should make another record. I'm in Tasmania. And I went round his house and he played me these tracks, and I smoked a joint and I made up the words, and then the concept all fell together in about 2 days. And then at the end of it, we went to a Japanese restaurant and drank some sake and said, there, we've made our new album. And I sort of, post all of that, I kind of figured out it should be about this, it should be this sort of steampunk kind of lamentation of humanity and blah, blah, blah. You know, the critics, you know, they this thing in this Roger Waters area of you know, writing about the human condition and all the people, very much centered on Victorian idea of the afterlife and what happens after you die and stuff. Very steampunk kind of idea, mixing up different eras with things that couldn't possibly really have ever collided. But we've taken it all on and mixed it all up and put out Premonition K. I don't know what it all means. If someone said, what is the concept behind this? I'm not sure what it is. It's just to enjoy, you know. People say it's like a mixture of David Bowie and Pink Floyd, and I will accept that.
Yes.
If Pink Floyd and David Bowie aren't making records anymore, if you do like that kind of thing, here's what me and Martin have come up with.
It's genius. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's been a real sort of highlight.
Oh, great.
Of the year.
Listen, David, at any moment I'm going to be cut off.
Oh, yes.
So
okay.
Don't think I've rudely hung up, but my phone I think is on like 1 now.
1. Well, shall we say goodbye? Because otherwise it'll be...
It's a shame because I would have stayed on but my phone's gone, and when I unplug the headphones, I can't hear what you're saying.
No, well, look, thank you ever so much.
It's been a real pleasure.
Take care. It's been amazing. Thank you ever so much.
Can you let them know whenever this will actually run?
I will be in touch with your chap. Is it Jerry?
Jerry, yeah.
Jerry Ranson. Okay, I will. But look, have a lovely day. I'm going to go to bed. Take care.
Keep on rocking in the free world.
I will. Dave. Good old Neil Young. Bye-bye. Bye. And as you gather, that was the end of the interview. Thank you for Steve for giving me the time for that fascinating insight into his creative life. And yes, fascinating. As I said, he's got 2 pretty new albums out, which I'll give you the links in the notes below. But this has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Check it out. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.